Hey, welcome to This Is What Democracy Sounds Like. I'm Kevin Prang. This program is a presentation of Metropolitan Congregations United. MCU is a community organization that brings together religious congregations, community groups, and individuals to work for a common purpose, to create a better life for all residents of the region. We work at the intersection of race, economy, political power, gender, and the structures of oppression at work within us individually, within our organization, or within the community. We are working to build people's control of the government, building community control of the economy, expanding the public sphere, and creating structural racial equity. Today, my guest is Reverend James Ross II, the pastor at Pilgrim Congregational United Church of Christ in St. Louis, and is also the new president of the board of MCU. Today, we're going to talk about direct action, what it is, how it works, and how it relates to the work of people of faith. Welcome, Reverend Ross. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Good. So with the recent murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, we've seen people angry about racism and the abuse of power by police getting to the streets and expressing themselves in public. One of those tools being used is direct action. So let's start with a definition. What is direct action?
Direct action is an effort in which people who are concerned about an issue use their bodies or provide some other action that confronts the specific issue. So it brings to light a particular problem, and it illustrates a potential solution. It usually has a target so that there is a person who can respond to that action, and it offers a specific way forward. So it is going directly to the source of the problem through whatever means that is, and offering a way to resolve the issue that is a concern.
Okay, and it's also been pointed out before that this is different than just a march or a protest. What are some of the differences?
Yeah, some of the differences for me are that a march or protest usually is about demonstrating numbers of people, and that is sort of the biggest issue. But direct action usually causes a disruption of some type. So it creates some kind of a problem that needs to be fixed. So it draws to the attention of those who are in power, the power of the people organized together, so that it puts the pressure on decision makers to do something to resolve the concerns that are being raised.
Okay, you talked about addressing this power towards those in power, whether it's the police or whether it's lawmakers who have the ability to make change. But there's also direct action that sort of disrupts daily life. And I've had friends of mine ask, what's that purpose? So what is your answer to someone who thinks that or questions the shutting down of a shopping mall or the highway? That also is a direct action.
Mm-hmm. That is a direct action, and in my mind, it has a number of purposes. One is to highlight for the individuals involved, so those who are shopping or those who are driving along, to remind them of this issue, and to demonstrate to them that there is a role for them to play, and to call them to be in solidarity, and also to so maybe if it's for a shopping center, to also draw to the attention of those who stand to lose money when those shutdowns occur. And I know that those are often inconvenient for people, but that's the goal, right? They are intended to be disruptive because, the way that I would say it is that if you think this is inconvenient for you, imagine the inconvenience that people are trying to address and the ongoing inconveniences of daily life for those who have chosen to put themselves in their bodies or to risk whatever it is to be involved in this situation.
Okay, yeah, I had thought about the disruption or the inconvenience factor before, but something you just said was that we have to remember that power is supposed to rest in the hands of people. So that disruption is also disrupting voters, if you will, who are going about their daily business, reminding them of the issue too. So,
right, because often we can, if something is not of a particular concern to someone, often it falls from their consciousness. And I think that these actions serve as a reminder for those who who may not be directly impacted by an issue or concern, that this is still an issue. So, people complain about having to wait in traffic when there is a disruption. Well, if that is a disruption that is about police treatment of African Americans, it is ultimately a small inconvenience to be reminded that there are people who are dying at the hands of police, often unjustly. So if it has the impact of reminding people or bringing to their consciousness that this is a reality, then in my mind, it's worthwhile.
Okay, good. So how do you see participating in a direct action as part of your Christian faith?
Mm-hmm. So for me, I believe that as a Christian, I seek to follow in the ways of Jesus. And I believe that Jesus spent his entire life in ministry in a way that was about confronting unjust power. And so that means that he used his body, he used his words, he used everything he had to confront those structures that were unjust to poor people, to marginalized people, for women. And he did it in ways that were not always, as kind and gentle as we sometimes domesticate Jesus to be. So if you think about Jesus overturning tables in a temple, that is not, an act of timidity at all, right? That is problematic. I mean, for people who were there, that's a major disruption. Or if you think about Jesus interrupting a conversation where someone expects a conversation to go in a particular way and taking all of the attention away from that conversation, that is a disruption that is a direct action. Or even for me, meeting someone at a well and having a conversation with someone with whom he's forbidden or whom society would say you're not supposed to talk to, that is a major type of disruption that would be seen as scandalous. And in the same ways, much of what is done in direct action is seen as scandalous by many people. It is not polite. It's not in the world of acceptability in terms of the way that we think about what is more acceptable. So I think that it is the same tradition.
Okay. Take the question and flip it a little bit. How do you think your faith makes your approach to direct action different than just political?
So I think that what we think of as political, first of all, depends on how our lives are impacted by it. So you can consider something just political if you can view it from a distance. But the issue of, let's say, policing or police violence or racial justice or queer justice is not political when it is your life that is at stake, right? So that's the first thing. And it's also about the involvement of real people, right? So it is not simply that we are talking about this in a theoretical frame. It is about how God's people are impacted and how their lives change or do not change as a result of these actions. And so perhaps you could call that political, but I think of that as being in solidarity with God's people, which I believe, I happen to believe that Jesus and God are in solidarity with those who are most marginalized. And so I think that this is very much, for me, in keeping with my faith traditions and practices and beliefs.
So how do you stay mentally and spiritually ready? How is practice prepare you for action, if you will?
So for me, it is important to remain grounded in why we're doing the work that we're doing. It's also, for me, the stories of faith are really important to remember where the motivation comes from and to remember what it means to be in solidarity with people, to draw on what my own experiences of loss and oppression and disfranchisement have been, and to hear the stories of others. So to be always connected to all of those things. Also, though, to understand what the goals are and how that relates to who I see myself to be in the world. I think people approach these from various spiritual perspectives, but I think that whatever it is, it's important to understand what grounds you as an individual and how you stay focused. Because the truth is that often these become, there is the potential sometimes for these to become volatile situations. And you have to you remember your grounding in order to be able to behave in the ways that are strategic, that are in keeping with who you want to be, and all those kinds of things. You have to know how you're going to behave in the face of violence directed toward the group. You have to know how you're going to behave if things start to escalate. And it helps to be trained in all of those things, but it's also helpful to be very clear about who you are in relation to your faith and how you believe your faith leads you to operate in such moments.
Okay, good. So a lot of outside observers may think direct actions are kind of random and chaotic, but talk about what goes into preparation. These are not necessarily, hey, let's just get together, but there's a lot of planning that goes in, if not time-wise, sometimes time doesn't allow, but there's definitely that thought about the target and the why. So how does that happen?
Right, and I would say that a wise direct action would never be just sort of randomly done. It is very specific. There needs to be a clear target. So who is the person who we want to reach? But beginning with, what is the problem that we want to solve or address? So who is the person who can solve that problem or address that problem, begin to move forward that problem? And then what are the ways to bring this to the attention of that person to create a situation to which this person has to respond, to put pressure on this person, to do whatever it means to generate a situation in which this person can be responsive. What does this person care about? Who does this person hear? If it's election time, how do we generate an action that this person needs to address in order to be electable? If it is another time, to whom is this person accountable, and how do we create an action in which this person needs to respond to persons about whom he or she is accountable? In other times, is what is it that matters in the daily life and operation of the space in which this person is talking about? All of those things should be considered. So, but ultimately, you want to think about what is the action that would lead this person to respond. Right? So how do you create that situation? But it should never be, in my mind, an effective direct action would never be random. It would never be without a target. And it would always have very clear goals, very clear asks of the person whom you're approaching or who is the target.
Do you feel sometimes that those goals and those asks get lost in the media when it's all about images of confrontation? Does that concern you at all?
I think it does happen sometimes. I think that the challenge for people who organize these actions is to make sure that everything that we do is targeted around, is messaged properly. So that if there are posters or anything, as much as you have control over that, to make sure that the message is clear on those posters, to make sure that the chants are clear about what the message is. Absolutely. I think often, either because media people, and as a person who was a journalist for a long time, is sometimes unclear to media people. So maybe we don't always do a good job of articulating in advance what we're asking for, which is, I think, part of it. And I think also, sometimes reporters are put on stories at the last minute. They don't get the information they need to have, so they do what they see. They report on what they see. But our goal, our challenge, our responsibility, I believe, is to find ways that those messages come through regardless. That means that everybody who's speaking should know and be very, very clear and very direct about what the issue is and what the asks are. It means that, again, all of the media, all of the posters, anything like that we do, chants, all of that should be consistent. And it's a lot of work, quite frankly. I think people think that people just get together and show up, but that is not the case at all. And I'm not suggesting that there aren't sometimes people who get together and show up and protest something, but that is different from a strategic direct action.
And I guess that brings up two questions. One is this is long-term work too. This is a lot of times the results don't happen the day of, or even the week of, or the month of, or sometimes even the year of. But it sounds like it's constant pressure that needs to be placed on the structures.
It is constant pressure. For example, today there is an action which we'll be doing at the youth center, and this is the second action in the last few months that is about seeking to have youth released. But even before that, organizers have sent a letter to the administrators there. So, this is not something where you go and you necessarily anticipate, oh, we're going to do this one action and something will happen. It would be great if things happen that way. But especially if you're talking about long-term policy changes, specific policy changes, the way changes in the rules, changes in the ways that things happen overall, those usually require repeated ask and maybe even different tactics and approaches. So there may be direct action, there may be other approaches, there may be, you may have a legislative campaign or some other campaign around it. So I think that the challenge of doing change work often is that it is, for the most part, long-term work, and the rewards, the successes sometimes seem small in the interim. And that can be discouraging, quite frankly. But for people who are committed to seeing those results, there is a necessity of staying in tune and staying engaged until the work is done. Okay,
good. And the action you were talking about is directed at the Department of Youth Services facility on Hogan Street in North St. Louis, which we did a drive around a month ago. And what is so frustrating with that is everybody sort of saw this coming, but this week it was reported that 18 of the youth in the facility now have come down with COVID-19. And it's something that was preventable, and it's something that our actions were actually asking for ahead of time. But because action wasn't taken, those kids have gotten sick. And that's just heartbreaking that the answer was there, but now these kids' lives are affected this way by this illness.
Absolutely. This is exactly what the efforts were intended to prevent. We knew that there could not be proper social distancing. We knew that the sanitation requirements would not be able to be met. We knew all of these things. And as you said, the ask was for these young people to be able to go home, for them to avoid the situation now more than then, to have tested positive for COVID-19. The other frustrating part about that is that we know from best practices and other data that community-based solutions are the most effective when seeking to address the concerns of youth who have been accused of participating in some type of behavior that would be defined as criminal. And so it just doesn't make sense from any perspective. And now we find ourselves in this situation unnecessarily. And it is the young people who will suffer as a result.
Okay. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Now, specifically when we're talking about direct actions that target racism, how should whites be allies and participate? We're the ones that benefit from the structure that's in place, and we have to be mindful of that when we enter this space. So any advice on that?
Well, I think the very most important item is to follow the leadership of Black people who are there. This is not the time for white people to decide that they need to be out front unless they are requested by Black leadership to go out front. Sometimes that is a strategic choice, but it is important to always be willing to yield, to be able to hear the voices, the goals, the ideas of the Black folk who are there, or the people of color who are there, and to not assume that you have the answers or that you need to be the savior, because people aren't looking for a savior. People are looking for allies and partners. And I think that's the most important thing, to know that there is inherent power in whiteness, and to not use that power in a way that is destructive in that moment. And also, I think there's the other piece about, oftentimes there are engagements with police in these types of situations, to be very careful about what that looks like, because there is a way, our experiences with police are not necessarily the same. And so it is not helpful in a situation where people of color are talking about police violence for white people who are involved to buddy up with police as though they're friends. And that sometimes happens, right? And it's well-meaning, it's just not helpful in those situations. So to be very clear about what the goals are, to follow the leadership, and to just hang back and until asked to do something different.
Okay. And one of the things that sort of was an eye-opener for me when listening to the direct action training last week, I was blinded to because of my privilege, is how oppositional the police or other authorities are. They're very tactical in their actions, whether it be surveillance or the way they form in the streets, and this reality affects how groups plan and operate, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Groups know that those sorts of behaviors are possible and have to decide to situate bodies in preparation for that, or in anticipation for that. And as I said, that may mean that sometimes white participants are asked to do particular things that can be helpful in responding to that. And it also means that if you aren't sure what's going on, it can be a dangerous situation for you. So it's also important to follow the leadership of the folks who are there.
Okay, that's a good transition to safety. By nature, direct action takes risks. What are preparations for safety, and what are some guidelines?
Yeah, I would say just the first thing is to be very clear about what the expectations are of the organizers. To never go to an action alone, to have a partner, somebody who knows where you are. So that's two things. So you want to have a buddy with whom you're going, or a group of people, and you also want to make sure that somebody who's not going knows your whereabouts and knows your personal information. You want to do things like carry as little with you as you possibly can. You want to make sure you're dressed appropriately so that if you need to leave an area quickly, you can run, or whatever it is that you need to do. You want to carry something that you can use to cover your face if people are using tear gas or something. You want to make sure that you don't leave alone. You want to make sure that you check with the organizers to find out if there are any particular concerns that they have also, so that you can make sure you're ready to address any specific situations that you may not as an individual anticipate.
Okay, good. And your church is hosting a de-escalation training. Can you describe what is de-escalating training, and who is it aimed at?
Absolutely. De-escalation is pretty much as it sounds. So often in direct action, there is the possibility specifically for police to engage in actions that can move an action from nonviolent to one of violence, frankly, or that could cause some type of harm to people who are there, physical harm. And this is intended to provide people with tips about how to best engage when such a situation presents itself. So here's how you show up for this kind of a thing. And these are the tips to specifically make sure that you are not contributing to making matters worse. Here's how you protect yourself in this situation. Here's how you have to protect others. Here are things you do and things that you don't do. And it's targeted at everybody who is seeking to participate in a protest. We also are specifically including clergy members in this because, MCU does work very closely with faith communities of all types. And there is a special role clergy often play in these types of gatherings, as people who can help to de-escalate situations, as people who can be voices to help address a specific type of triggering or target or trauma that someone is dealing with in the moment. And hopefully the presence of clergy helps to, historically, in many cases, police have been less likely to engage in violent actions when in the face of clergy. That doesn't necessarily mean that's always the case, but there is a role for clergy to play with that. And I think particularly white clergy as it relates to that.
Okay, good. I want to thank you for your time today. This has been some good information, and we want to encourage folks to keep an eye out on social media for opportunities to become involved. So thank you, Reverend James Ross II, the pastor of Pilgrim Congregational United Church of Christ in St. Louis, and also the president of the board at MCU. To learn more about MCU, go to Metropolitan Congregations United, mcustlewis.org. Also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for news and events. And if you would like to participate, that's where to find events. I'm Kevin Prang, and you've been listening to This Is What Democracy Sounds Like. Tune in again next time, and thank you for listening.